Hello, dear friends from all around the world, and hello from Holland, from where I welcome you to this conversation today in a very important time. It's a conversation about post-COVID leadership, a situation that has made us all very alert and it keeps us up on our toes now every single day. And it's about a discussion how we can use this window of opportunity to instill the right decisions, to make the right choices on the way forward so that we can build back better. And particularly today is how we can use circular economy approaches to support this build back better work. And I want to thank you all for taking time, and I will make sure we have a high energy, a fast-paced conversation so that it's worth all your time. Thank you again for zooming in. I'm Harold. I'm a circular economy and a systems change activist. The last 3 years, I have been also the CEO of the Amsterdam-based social impact venture called Circular Economy that works particularly on the circular economy transition. And at the moment, I'm an advisor to the global climate change negotiations in the COP26 process and everything we do there to bring businesses into this very important work. At the beginning, I wanted to take 3 breaths with you because I've been myself part of many Zoom and interactive conversations online. But I think the most important is that we bring the right intention to this conversation. So please, wherever you sit, and the fantastic thing is we had over 500 people signing up for this talk, many in these Zoom calls, and all the rest hopefully can follow us on YouTube. Let's all together take 3 times a breath so we really show up with the right intention. And we leave all the things we don't need. And we invite all the good thoughts we really need for this very important conversation. So a 3rd time, a big breath for the next 40 minutes, and I will be sure that we keep on time and close this talk also on time. And we will also share with you a recording that we have produced. So thank you again for showing up. The last days and a month have been very intense. And this is the beginning of a conversation, as we need many of those to come up with the right solutions that we need on the way forward. I was asked many times in interviews, also in the last days, what can actually be done tangible? What solutions that are practical we can discuss so we can instill them and bring them to the decision makers in governments and businesses that are right now taking very important decisions that are going to lock in how the economy and society is being run over the next months and years. And that is what motivated me to invite all of you to have a conversation today. And again, thanks for showing up. I think it's an opportunity for all of us, and that brings me to the us. It's a floor that is wide open for you to submit your questions, and I will be the host today, which makes it sometimes easier that I channel the conversation with 2 very important guests that are asked to share our time with today. And I think we need to use this time to come with a very clear push forward, the push for right leadership, for the right decisions, and for the right buy-in from all of us to make that happen. I had an interesting conversation the last days with a business leader who said, if we are able now, because of this unique break, to change 20% of what was done before, 20% of the system, then that is a lot. Because the system and we all gonna go back also to some kind of a new normal. And if we, I thought, are able to change 20%, then that's the 20% we in systems change and in systems theory often talk about as a potential for a bigger tipping point where we can unleash a bigger change that will be necessary to set up what we are doing and what the planet is about in a very sustainable way between good civil society, a good society-driven change, between good business action and between government that is supporting this change with the right policies. So let's use this short window of opportunity together. And please submit your questions. Again, a reminder, we will make sure we pick them up. I would like to have 3 parts of this conversation with 2 friendly guests and friends of mine that I've invited today. One is Ken Webster, who is currently a lecturer at the University of Exeter, and he is a long-standing friend of the circular economy movement. He has also been the Director of Innovation at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, a fantastic organization that is supporting this work. And on the other hand, Alex Lemire, who is a writer, an activist, he is very active in many networks and has also set up by himself with his friends and colleagues the African Circular Economy Network called ASEN. Welcome to both of you, Alex and Ken, to this conversation. And I would like to keep this conversation with 3 blocks, as we discussed before a bit. And the first block will be about what can we learn from the past. The second block is what is the things that keep us awake at the moment and the right decisions we have to take, also with our knowledge about the circular economy on the way forward. And the third part will be about the leadership and how we can make sure that what we have learned in the past and the positive action we have seen, for example, on circular economy and systems change will not be lost because of what we are seeing at the moment happening. So I want to hand over the first question to Ken and Alex. A quick answer. Ken, Alex, do you see the COVID break that we are currently facing as a real opportunity, or is it more of a threat? Please, Ken, with a short answer.
Yeah, it can be very positive, excuse my voice, but it can be a threat too, because the history of recessions is that a lot of businesses go bust and other businesses buy them up, and the situation becomes more concentrated, not more diverse.
Thank you, Ken. Alex, will your quick on take, opportunity or more a threat?
Well, it can be an opportunity if the investments that we see are coming with countermeasures into more environmentally friendly and human friendly protections. So if this period help us to change and to improve the life systems and human systems protections, it will be a great opportunity.
Thank you very much for this first round. Now, Ken, maybe for a bit longer answer, what have we learned or have to learn from the past? What kind of things we have to keep in mind to make sure the current situation is being turned into an opportunity?
Yes, a lot of people tend to think of circular economy as just really products, components, materials, how they're used, who uses them, and so on and so forth, and who gets the benefit. But a great number of people forget that Kenneth Boulding famously said in the 60s that an economy is about knowledge, stocks and flows, materials and energy. And we forget the knowledge side of it, because a part of that knowledge is the monetary system. And if we look in the past, we had 2007-8 crash, we had the Great Depression 29-33, and these both were essentially monetary phenomena. In the first instance, I don't think we learned anything particularly. We saved the financial institutions and didn't institute what many people were hoping for, which was a rather different approach to products, components and materials, particularly since effectively, I'm thinking of Britain here, the ownership of the banks was at the discretion of the public realm. They were all bankrupt. Going back to the Great Depression, in fact, Roosevelt was elected to do the New Deal. And those echoes through to the current time when the people are talking about a Green New Deal. So the problem is to try and make sure you get the right balance between financial interests and the productive economy, should we call it that? And that's a really difficult one, because so far in the COVID crisis, we've seen far more money directed at financial institutions straight away. That you know, you can take a picture of the stock market, it isn't that bad compared to where it could be, because trillions have gone into making sure that there's liquidity in that sort of market. So
to also circulate if we want to make a successful economy happen. How would you see this happening?
Well, this is the key point. Circulation is the key. Now, this is what Roosevelt managed to do. He injected money into the base. This is what we've seen a little bit of in the current crisis, which inject money into the base, not into the financial institutions primarily. It's got to go to the people who need it. And from circular economy point of view, this allows people to feel secure. It allows them to begin to experiment with different ways of delivering goods and services. They won't do that if they feel totally insecure. They won't do that if they can't feed themselves. You know, you can't get a reaction which is positive when large numbers of the population are reduced to penury. And Roosevelt recognized that. So alongside whatever you might talk about in terms of materials, has to be a monetary system which is circulatory, not extractive.
When you see now the first measures and the famous packages, for example, that EU has announced, where they actually also admitting they don't know yet any details of these rescue packages and how they should play out, do you see some of this hope of yours is materializing, or do you think it is being a continuation of what we have been doing in the past and what we've been seeing?
Oddly, it's a complete mix, Harold. Some good things are that people are no longer saying it can't be done. Yes, of course, you can give money directly to people to keep them going. Before that seemed impossible. You know, things like the ideas like basic dividend or basic income. Of course, you can do it. You know, asking where the money is going to come from. That's a political question, not an economic one. For any country that owns its own currency, or in say Europe, the ECB has that responsibility. So that isn't a real question anymore. Where does the money come from? The question is, does that money add to a real increase in a productive economy? You know, does it respond to the money? And it's good to get past that idea that somehow government spending depends on taxation primarily. It does not. Creation of credit doesn't depend upon anything other than the banking rules. It's not based on, people don't lend deposits. Where do you think the government's got all this extra money? Did they find it in a cupboard? You know, or America, they found some trillions in the Federal Reserve. No, they just spent it into existence or made it available. It's an accounting measure. So that frees up the thinking. You won't have some rather dull questions about how can you afford it, because you don't have anymore that idea that everything starts with taxation and then spending. In fact, works the other way around. It's spending and then taxation to make sure you don't get any unwarranted price spikes. So that's a shift in perspective, which allows much more creative things to be done.
I want to get back to this shift in perspectives and freeing up thinking a bit later. I want to rope in Alex here. Alex, what keeps you up at night at the moment when you think about the mistakes that we shouldn't repeat, that we have been seeing perpetuated in the past?
Well, what keeps me up at night is to see governmental investment without any countermeasures. That, for instance, if you pour billions into a car manufacturers, like it's planned to be in France, we've already packed parking lots outside of the factories and less consumer power. So who's going to buy those cars? And besides the current financial crisis that we are living, there will be a next one if we open up the production units to produce even more car and to let the marketing messages take over. Consumer power is going to be, I mean, consumer will be risk averse in the post-COVID period, and I don't see how they will acquire all these cars even with strong marketing messages. So that's typically the nature of a throughput economy, an economy where you have to produce in volumes versus an on-demand economy, which is hopefully the next economy. So that's a major issue. The other thing is that we've been optimizing everything, including human health and natural living systems, and that limits our capacity for being creative and being able to increase our resilience to future shocks. And as we know, COVID is just one small shock, given the future climate shocks and inequality shock. So this is a test period, which is a good thing. I mean, we are testing our systems, and obviously the systems are not responding well. So it's an opportunity to rethink everything and to change our value-based system. I mean, to value what we would like to see, and to value the foundations of life, including the human foundation. So it could be good news, but right now investments are not going into the right directions. And the government, we see that the governments are not ready. They don't understand in most of the cases, and the legal framework are not ready as yet to cope with the minimum change. I mean, you mentioned 20% of change in the coming months or year. We need a strong framework to protect us from the next catastrophe.
Can you give an example now when we look at the rescue packages, for example, from airlines or certain producers of big items? And we all have been part of the flight industry, I think, or many of us. And now we see KLM, for example, with I think a majority of their staff being put to the ground and not being able to fly, with 60, 70, 80% of the fleet capacity. Do you think these rescue packages are a continuation of the past a bit, or do you see actually positive change?
Well, it's a mixed answer, like Ken was providing you with. On one hand, the government, I mean, Air France, KLM, to name them, mentioned that they will help them at any cost. And then most probably there's been some public pressure in between, and the government came back, at least on the French side, saying there will be environmental measures and we will insist on the group to change. The Air France CEO has announced that there will be measures in that sense, reducing the fleet, which is costly or polluting, and moving into more environmentally friendly measures. But when you go on the website, Air France website, the short haul that were supposed to be removed, the Paris to Bordeaux, which are quicker by train, they're still appearing on the Air France website today. So, I mean, what's wrong? I mean, they are announcing short haul flights starting in May 11th, which is our Liberation Day.
Yeah, I think some of in my own home country, Austria, I think some of the signals that also in the rescue packages, certain measures to steer the airlines towards more climate targets are actually positive. I think we also should acknowledge this. And I see it's really an opportunity now to bring a strong voice forward. So one of the questions at the end will also be, how can we be such a strong voice? I just got a question in from Cecilia. Thank you, Cecilia, for submitting the question over to Ken here. What can be done to keep the circular economy movement resilient throughout this crisis, so we don't lose out on the positive things organizations like Circular Economy, the Ellen MacArthur Foundations, Citra, many organizations around the world, in Africa, the ASEAN network have been achieving? How can we be or build a resilient circular economy movement?
Yeah, that's the key word, is resilient. Because that's what the economy needs, more resilience, because we've demonstrated that this COVID crisis demonstrated that overextended supply lines are brittle. So I think the circular economy as a direction of travel is going to be reinforced in the response to this COVID element, because you'll have a great deal of public investment in different things. There's the climate change thing, which encourages that. There is the problem of people want more regional and perhaps local production, because we want to build resilience. We want to build value with what people have. It's absolutely consistent with that direction. And happily, there's always a dark side, as we're saying, an increasing concentration of industry might lead to a big shift to selling products as services. But in a very restricted environment. What I mean by that is very few firms will dominate. So you'll get less material use, less airplanes, less whatever. But the spin-off from that is it won't be necessarily very cheap. It won't be necessarily very flexible. They will manage the materials and products and components as assets, and they'll be able to get more revenue from selling less stuff. Now, that might sound great, and it's great for materials, but it's not great if you're thinking that the flexibility of use, for instance, you might think it's important to fix your own iPhone or Fairphone or whatever. But this might result in a situation where these opportunities are squeezed out. You have to pay for access to everything. And if the economy is not growing very well, business wants to increase its share of this. And then if the crisis means an increasing concentration of business, you might get what you wanted, which is less material use, but at the other side, you're not going to get it cheap, and you're not going to be very flexible about who you choose to provide. You can't be flexible about who you choose to provide those services. So careful what you ask for sometimes, because ownership and democracy are pretty closely linked. You know, your freedom to do what you want with an object you own is actually deep down quite valuable. That's where democracy came from. It's about owning land. You could originally get the vote if you had some land, and then it extended across. Now, if we don't own our objects, and increasingly we don't own property, we just become supplicants for what Michael Hudson calls a neo-feudal situation. Everything's nicely controlled, it'd be very resource efficient, but you don't get a lot of choice.
What is a circular economy, circular society approach? How could it help? How could it help in this situation, circular economy and systems thinking?
Because there are two elements to systems thinking. All systems have core avenues, if you like, which benefit from efficiency, economies of scale. More resilient end of it, all of these systems have an interplay between efficiency and resilience. You add value with what you've got. So you're going to have an interplay between adding value with what you've got, supported by things like basic dividend or basic income, with an increased infrastructure from governments. And on the other side, you're likely to have very few big firms concentrated to control the big flows of things like smartphones, televisions or whatever, airlines already very concentrated. So you get an interplay between the two. It won't be one or the other, but it's how that balance falls and what it means for things like democracy and participation and being a prosumer. These are going to be very conflicted areas. Circular economy is going to benefit from this, but you have to sometimes ask what parts of the system will benefit, and do you like all of them the same? I think there is some difference between the emphasis.
Building on the question to Alex, building a resilient circular economy movement and making sure the right answers reach also the right decision makers. Any ideas on how this could be happen, especially when you take your approach that you have been advocating for a lot with a human-centered circular economy approach?
Well, the human-centered circular economy approach is just answering the questions of what is expected of us in this economy. I mean, what's the human role in these economies, and what function do we have to play in order for this circle to last longer? And when you look at a 7 billion world moving to a 10 billion world, you see a lot of abundances that are often seen as a negative aspects in a linear economy, where we need to get rid of the people because they are the costly bits in the production units. So we prefer automatized systems, but in a localized economic model where you need to care, and we see here the caring economy unfolding. That's why the COVID could be an opportunity, because it starts with changing your mindsets. Okay, you need to change yourself before changing the economy, and the caring economy is unfolding with, at its roots, the hospital and clinic network, and people starting to care for each other. So that's interesting, because you see unfolding the energy that represents a populated world, i.e. labor. And the more you repair, the more you care, the more you hire people to fix the stuff which is limited in your material economy. I mean, unless you want to go dig outside of planet Earth, like some are proposing, you need to do with what you have, and you need to do more with less, and therefore you need the people. So you need labor to cost less in order to increase taxes on resources, therefore to protect those resources that are limited in your market. So you need a more repair-based economy, and this is possibly unfolding with what we are seeing with COVID. Just an example is all those websites that are popping around, offering local farmers foods, local supply, local services. This is interesting. Obviously, it's not going to be just the core of the next economy, but it's human are the glue between the material economy and the natural life systems, and this glue is starting to fix stuff. So we start to realize that there is no economy if there is no humans. So that's interesting, and even my president is talking about the human sphere.
Yeah, thank you. I want to go into the second stage of the talk. So once was what we shouldn't do anymore, things we should avoid. And there are many questions coming in now, and I want to frame them under the looking forward aspect. And over to you, Ken, again. What can we do now? And be a bit more specific, maybe, because many questions are coming in about the global supply chains. Is this an opportunity to redraw your human supply chains? Global supply chains. And I think you also have particular thinking there in this area, how circular economy also can localize and support more localized efforts.
Yeah, I began to outline it before. The first thing, and I think Alex referred to this a little bit, is you have to move taxes away from from people and onto resources and waste. But that makes things more expensive for people on low incomes particularly. So they need to have something that will allow them to live well. And if you're moving the taxes away from people, they will have more money. But you want to then make sure that money is circulating to the periphery, and that may be part of that basic income, basic dividend, but also something that people never remember, which is there's a huge 250 trillion debt overhang in the global economy. How on earth do we just carry on and not mention the debt? And it's and half of that, at least 125 trillion, is private or non-financial debt. So without some form of deleveraging debts, you can't get the economy kickstarted. So that's all quite important. But adding value with what we have, that Gunter Pauli phrase I keep using, is so important. It's how do you enable people who've got local resources to add value to that and to begin circulating it in a sort of network of enterprises. And that means providing, and this is part of that investment program, I am being quite concrete here, investment programs to help people produce, consume and exchange. Markets originally, marketplaces were one of those, but now you've got things like maker labs, you've got temporary storage warehouses, ideas like that, so people can access materials. They could also access land, which is another deeply unpopular idea. But in the 30s, if we're talking about the past, in the 1930s about Britain, lots of towns allocated land for allotments, they're called in England, small plots of lands to grow things. Why not have more of that? Because you can't really rebuild an economy by saying you can't get access to any more resources and labor is the only thing you can sell. We've got to be a bit more creative than that. And so for me, that's the basic one, shift taxes away from profits and labor onto what they call economic rents or the unearned surplus. Make sure people have some form of debt jubilee, they call it, or a pay down on the debts, and create the right sort of infrastructure to enable production and consumption exchange at a local and regional level. And that means these firms are not very wealthy, but they need some infrastructure that helps them. It might be a platform cooperative in terms of an app, so they can produce, consume and exchange. It might be more of this, enabling people to buy directly from the farmers. It might be access to land, community agriculture. These are quite simple and practical things. They're not rocket science, but it's part of an investment to help defeat climate change as well. So for me, it's if you set the rules of the game differently, you can leave it to people's ingenuity very often They'll get busy, they'll get active. At the moment, we have rules of the game that say economies of scale and efficiency and extended supply chains are the thing. We will support that. We will subsidize fossil fuel production.
Okay, and very briefly, because
win against that.
let me interrupt you. The question comes back on how do you enable such local and decentralized circular economies? Because there's often a price question about this, obviously, and the cost question. This comes in from Jan and also Syed Mehdi. How can you enable that? And maybe a short answer to this.
If taxes are not levied on people's income, that's a great start. They get more money. Now, if you are taxing resources like fossil fuels properly, or at least you're taking away the subsidies and you're taxing the fossil fuels, that helps. If the price question comes up, and as always does, you get rid of the middle person. In other words, more selling directly from producer through to user or consumer. You've got to cut out the people who take the bigger share. If you're going to deal with the question of price, an idea from Britain is called beetroot bonds, of all things. Beetroot, the plant, which means that as a dividend to everybody, you get a small extra currency, which is only valid for buying within community produced or small scale farm products, food products. In other words, you get the spending in there. You can't sort of say, oh, well, we'll leave it to the unfettered free-for-all market, because you'll just reproduce what we've got now, which is an increase in concentration among very few businesses. So that's what I mean about changing the rules of the game. Just to repeat that key point, change the rules of the game, people get busy, it happens. If you don't change the rules of the game, all of your little community enterprise efforts are probably going to be wasted, because you're fighting against a system that's organized and incentivized for throughput and scale. I'll give you one tiny thing. I have to say this, Harold. Perspective changes from thinking in, say, regenerative agriculture from profit on yield to profit per hectare. You're not chasing yield, you're chasing profit per hectare, and it's a very different perspective.
Yeah, looking at redistributive aspects and also looking at prosperity from a much broader angle is certainly an important one now. Alex, some questions are coming in, and here we again in the area of what can we do now? You have been living and spending a lot of time in Africa. The question is the change of global supply chains, and how can circular economy now be and leverage the opportunities we see through the COVID break, and how could this be used in the Build Back Better approaches?
Well, in relation to Africa, I mean, Africa is ready to be cooperating with Europe. I mean, its closest partner in the next economy. The thing is that there's been a lot of talks between the two continents, but with the recent decisions of closing down our barriers and frontiers, collaboration seems to be focused on oneself. So it's a great opportunity for Africa as well as for Europe. I mean, Europe has a lot to learn from Africa because, as I often say, I mean, Africa is a circular continent, not from Western economics or neoliberalism principles that we understand, but from a survival economy that they have been going through all these years, and we can learn how to become resilient from some of the great examples we see in Africa. I mean, there are basically three things in Africa which we could learn from. I mean, Africa starts moving to a circular economy with a low carbon emission per inhabitant footprint, whereas we have to fight and to go below 1 planet footprint in the coming decades in Europe. So they are less than the global hectare per person average worldwide. So which is a great positive point. They have collaborative communities. People talk to each other and help each other. This is what we see since the beginning of COVID in Europe. And they are investing into low tech. Low tech doesn't mean a bad version of high tech. Low tech means using less energy. And in the future, we will have access to energy which is going to be more distributed, and therefore we would need to develop product that accept optimized energy as we find in nature.
But Alex, do you think, also yes or no answer maybe, do you think the current situation can lead to more opportunities around more local supply chains also in Africa?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Africa needs to move from an extractive economic model, then everything moves outside of Africa into keeping its production units within countries and continent, but not production units as the old good days, like we see in Asia these days, but investing in remanufacturing units, investing in doing products again and again, fixing them, remanufacturing them, so putting them back as new, and increasing the close relationship because of the distance with Europe, and to be the backyard of the remanufacturing activity of Europe. That could be a great way for Africa to reinvent itself.
Ken, I want to a question that came in on single-use plastic, because this was something you also, I think, were very much involved in within the foundation. Maybe a short answer to: do you think it can come back after the COVID crisis? Single-use plastic.
Unfortunately, yes, it will come back, because single-use plastic is largely related to the supply of ethanol, the petrochemical base chemicals, which have got extremely cheap. I don't want them to come back, but I would always say that the plastics are the wrong material for that use anyway. So designing something better is obviously the best way out of it, design it out. But the thing is, the supply, because of fracking, which if fracking collapses, you may have a collapse in the supply of the basic raw materials, but it's become so cheap, and they've expanded petrochemical production all over the world, that you will find a lot of single-use plastic still there, even in markets that you perhaps were finding unexpectedly opening up. So I'm not too expecting too much change there.
We had sorry, Alex, please.
From a consumer perspective, and from experience, what happened in France is that they banned single-use plastics, so straws and spoons, and but the producer of single-use plastic, they changed their label overnight to say that this plastic could be used several times. So they bypassed the law of being banned because of single usage into moving into multiple usage plastics. If you clean them.
Maybe this lack of transparency, Alex, a follow-up question, because it just came in. This more risky environment and the risk aversion of consumers. You have been talking about consumer behavior and the need to engage consumer, obviously, and the change process forward. How can we incentivize these people and us, the consumers, then really are making a change when we're looking at times where people actually are losing their jobs, and where we're looking at real economic employment that is skyrocketing at the moment, with I think 26 million people in the US alone having filed unemployment in the last weeks? How can this be done, that we entice people to be part of the change?
Well, the question is how can we incentivize people to be part of the change?
Despite the higher risk people are having now, also when people are losing their jobs.
Yeah, but what's happening in the US, I mean, obviously Europe has more resistant systems, and what's happening in the US is that the economy has been based on inequality, and inequality starts with not being able to access resources. So here, I mean, people needs to be to take the lead, and to the relocalization of the economies will drive people into changing behaviors. They need to spend carefully on things that they will acquire in the future. So they need to change themselves in order to see the system change. So and they need to lower their cost of life. Their daily cost needs to be lowered in order for them to be more flexible and to adapt to the new economy.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for submitting so many questions. I'll make sure also with the two speakers that we're going to get back to you and also circulate. Yes, there will be a recording of this. And we also make sure that we'll take up some of the suggestions in our continuation of this seminar series or this webinar series. And I want to spend the last 5 minutes now on leadership question. And back to you, Ken. Ensuring that circular economy stays of high relevance is something important to our listeners, to people who have been submitting questions today. It's very important to you personally. How can we take all leadership and how can we request leadership from our governments and business leaders so we make sure that the progress we've made in the past is not lost now? One thing that can happen and one thing we really have to do in the next days.
It's very hard to do that in 2 sentences, but I'll
You have 2 minutes.
I have 2 minutes. Okay, I'll do that. Every progress in society, says Yuval Harari, depends upon us having an idea of what will look like a prosperous future. Now, the idea of a prosperous future after World War II was everybody have more stuff. And then after 1980, it was around everybody can get access to credit and they can make a lot of money out of the housing market if they can buy their way into it. Now is the era of a more sensible discussion, if you like, about what our needs and wants are. When we've got climate change over there, we've got changing technologies giving us opportunity, and we've had COVID knocking the stuffing out of the economy. The key element will be, and a guy called Matthew Stollow writes about this a lot, is there will be a shock to start with, and then another story of the future will emerge. And we don't know what that story is, but it will include circular economy because circular economy ticks so many boxes. It's not going to be a magic button.
Alex, over to you. I feel sometimes that with all the work that has been going on in the last years, nearly somebody should make sure the approaches, the circular economy strategies, the work we have been doing on concretizing strategies into concrete actions should be sent in an email to all the government leaders, that the Build Back Better approaches cannot come only focused on one sector, but we really have to consider all of this as systems that are independent. My question also to you, how can we take all of us leadership in this in the next days? And 2, how we can make sure that the circular economy agenda is keeps its high relevance?
Well, leaders of tomorrow needs to understand that we are no longer consumers and users of goods and services, but we are living beings with all their complexities, and they need to understand that there are systemic challenges that each and every company, each and every individual are facing in the coming years, and a single company, be it those big names that we have in mind, cannot address the systemic challenges and the systemic risk that we face. So we need leaders to understand collaboration. We need even collaboration with pre-competitive markets, but they need to collaborate. They need to share resources in order to share costs, and they need to understand diversity. I mean, through diversities, you create more resilient sources of innovations, of solutions to a particular problem. You diversify your byproducts, and you are more resilient to future shocks. So any company, as big as it is not able to address future systemic challenges. So they have to collaborate independent of their sizes.
Ken, an interesting question from Czech come just in, and I would really like it to pose it to you. What are the 3, I shortened it, key circular economy policies that every government should now include into their Building Back Better strategies? Any short answer to that?
Yeah, you've got to pay the real cost of materials. 1, so real cost pricing. Secondly, create access to resources that people can get busy with. We've talked about land, as one of them. And the third one is shift taxes. Shift taxes away from people towards resources waste and economic rents, they're called in the jargon.
Thanks for the short answer. Great. Alex, anything to add from your side on these three policies that could help our government leaders that we should shout out to them?
No, these are the ones that I've been mentioning as well. Just insisting on granting access. Access to resources is the answer to inequity. And what I've been promoting into the human sphere is that circularity is great, but it does not guarantee resource access. So open source should be promoted. And again, the more you focus on the smaller loops of the technical sphere side of the circular economy, the more jobs you will be creating. Okay, there will be different jobs, but the more you focus on the repair-based economy, the more you move away from recycling, which is I waste, therefore I need to preserve what is being wasted, into I avoid, I prevent recycling, therefore I can repair and make the goods last longer, is transformed into human energy. So you replace fossil fuel with human energy, and you replace goods with human energy in order for them in order to do more with less and to have them last longer. So that's dropping labor taxes is critical, and you will see a new world unfolding. And the last point would be to change to at last change our reference point, which is moving away from GDP. I mean, unless you don't change that, like it's happening in Paraguay, in some Latin American countries, coming up with some alternative to GDP, New Zealand. Call it happiness, call it value-based system. I mean, you need to change the value-based system. Otherwise, we will still move circular economy into the wrong box with the wrong objective.
I want to another very big driver thing, and that's Chris is right to mention this in the chat right now. It is a need for global supply chains and the supply chain management policies around that to change, which can only happen through the inviting businesses and also government leaders to make that change together. I think that's a very important point I would like to add as well. I want to say thank you because I want to be really on time. We are running 2 minutes over time. I want to thank you, everybody who has been dialing in. We had great responses from around the world. This was only possible because of the other networks we organized this with. I want to mention them briefly: Circular Futures, Circular Conversations, the CE Club, Circular Economy Club, Connected Circles, and also Renewable Matters. And obviously ASEN, the network that Alexander works with, and also the university Ken is working with. So they had the time to participate in this dialogue. Thanks to all of you. We'll follow up, that's for sure. We're also going to come back with a continuation of this series to be more specific after, I think, a great kickoff today where I got a lot of energy from our conversation, Ken and Alex. And there's so many other questions that we could delve into much deeper. And I would like to ask you, because we all want to build a movement together, that we all help to spread the word that leadership is really needed now, that we will need action where we ourselves look at us in our changing of behavior as consumers, as influencers, and as people who are making at the ballot booths the change with voting the people into political positions that we have. And I think we have to reach out again in these next days, mobilize our networks, and make sure the right messages, circular economy being one of them, achieves the right people in the decision-making structures at the moment. I really urge you all to do this. I'll also do it myself and make sure that we follow up on these channels and suggest a new date for a new get-together. The plan is to do this next week. The last words I would like to leave to Alex and Ken. If you would have 3 words to say to the government leaders of this world at the moment, and also the people that are at the moment listening, what would that be? Because I truly believe it's an opportunity that we are facing right now. It's a short time opportunity, a short window, but we need to use it together. Maybe Alex, you first. 3 words that come to your mind that should be a daily reminder of what we should be doing.
The commons, protect the commons. Humans are key to everything, and last longer. Make sure that our economy, material economy, can last longer because we there is no other planet and we cannot go elsewhere, because any solutions out of space are unequal solutions, because it's not going to be a solution for 10 billion people.
Thank you. Ken, your 3 words?
Yeah, circulate, don't extract.
Thank you very much. That's the end of our first webinar on post-COVID leadership, how circular economy can play and will play a very clear role in building back better. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank
Alex
you.
and Ken.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everybody, for listening.